Hello, welcome back to Planet 40k. In today's video we're going to be talking about how to deny your opponent scoring points with their secondary objectives using this new chapter approved book. Now in the previous video that we did, we spoke about how to score with Necrons. This time we're going to be talking about how to deny your opponent. So we are going to be using the exact same format. We're going to be going through all the secondary objective options. We're not going to go through them in too much detail this time because we did that in the previous video. So yeah, let's kick on with the video. In fact, before we jump into these secondary objectives, let me just take your attention to friends that sponsor the channel, which is the Magnet Baron. Now today they're offering a Doomsday Ark custom flight stand kit for only $13.99 in US dollars. They're going to be shipping worldwide and you can use PayPal to pay for this purchase. Now what comes with the kit, you may ask? The kit will be containing one custom Doomsday Ark flight converter, one large rock anchor that's going to be hiding the actual magnet from view. Then you're going to have one large flight stand and then 4 magnets to of course attach the Doomsday Ark and the base together. Now this really does come in handy when you're traveling to games and tournaments because you simply fold your Doomsday Ark up. It's going to make it much safer for transport. Avoid snapping those really flimsy stands that come with the actual model. So yeah, head on to the Magnet Baron, $13.99 US dollars. Link would be down in the description below. So let's move on with the video. Okay, so we know that there are 5 categories when you're talking about secondary objectives. Now every single faction and codex does have their own unique secondary objectives. Now we're not going to be going through those today. We're just going through the standard ones that are available. So to begin, we're looking at the Purge the Enemy section, and the first one being Assassination. Now as mentioned in the intro, we're not going to read through every single one of these secondaries anymore. We've done that in the previous video. But how we're going to deny your opponent from scoring Assassination is very simple. Count how many character models are in your list before you actually want to enter the battle. And for example, if you've got 4 character models, that's going to be 3 points per character, and one of them will be 4 because it's going to be your warlord. So in this situation, you're going to be giving up 13 victory points. And what I would do is slightly shorten this. I'd only take maybe 3 characters so that you can only give your opponent a maximum of 10 victory points from Assassination. And of course, if you go even less than 3, they're going to be scoring even less. Now furthermore, to avoid gifting your opponent Assassination points, you need to protect your characters. So the Technomancer I've used as an example here, which is quite a common character when you've got your Necron list. The first one is Prismatic Offshoot Catron. I like to take this one at the moment because it avoids your Technomancer being able to be targeted at range regardless of a lookout Sir bubble being popped or not. So that's going to keep him up and running. Now alternatively, the Cryptothralls, which have made a slight comeback in this new chapter approved because they can now be doing some of the secondaries, but they are going to be using their Protector's Aura ability for your Cryptex such as your Technomancer. You only need to have one single model up and running. Again, your Technomancer won't be targeted at range. Furthermore, if you're taking say an Overlord model or any type of noble that's an infantry model, you could be using the Lich Guard's Guardian Protocols ability, very similar to the Cryptothralls, to avoid your Overlord being targeted at range. Now the easiest thing to do is to provide your characters with the Lookout Sir bubble. Your Canoptic Scarab Swarms are the easiest and cheapest methods of screening your character models, but sometimes it's nice to go with say a 20-man warrior blob, especially if you are taking an Overlord model, because he's going to be using his My Will Be Done ability with those Gorse Reapers, so he can be very easily hiding amongst those 20-man warrior blobs. Now other sections of the codex that are going to assist in keeping your characters up and running, first of all, from the relic section, you've got the Veil of Darkness relic. Now this isn't really there to keep your character alive, however, if you're in a fight that you know you're going to lose and you've got the Veil of Darkness relic, you can simply zip away in your own turn. It's not even going to be considered as falling back, and you're going to be going anywhere on the battlefield more than 9 inches away from any models. Whether or not you're taking a core unit with you, that's up to you, but sometimes it can get you out of dodge. Another relic option is the Nanoscarab Casket. It's simply giving your living metal ability an additional lost wound. That's particularly good for your Catacomb Command Barge. But if you do have an Overlord on foot, with the Sempiternal Weave, you can +1 to your toughness and wounds characteristics of the bearer. That's going to be making him much more resilient and much more difficult to remove from the battlefield. Then furthermore, with the Warlord trait, if you do want to decide to spend 1 command point and gain a Warlord trait, Enduring Will to -1 to all damage taken. Then lastly, if you're taking that Protocol of Undying Legions using Directive 1, very similar to the Nanoscarab Casket relic, you're going to be gaining an additional wound for living metal. That's with Directive 1 from Protocol of Undying Legions. So that's some of the ways to prevent your opponent from scoring Assassination. Let's move on to Bring It Down. Now to be honest, Bring It Down shouldn't really be a problem if you're playing with Necrons, because you're not likely going to be taking a lot of Titanic models to be gifting away points, and also you're not going to be taking loads and loads of vehicles either. Now don't get me wrong, we do have some lists where we take monoliths and tesseract bolts and maybe the Seraptic Heavy Construct, but unless your opponent actually knows your list pre-game, they're not likely going to be planning for that one. Now of course, as soon as you do declare your list, the option of Bring It Down will be quite appealing to your opponent, so just bear that one in mind. If you're taking a very heavy Titanic list, Bring It Down is going to potentially be your downfall. So that's the options from the Purge the Enemy list. Let's move on to the No Mercy, No Respite list. So the first one being Grind Them Down. So your opponent is going to need to remove more of your units in that battle round than you can do to them. Now the best way to avoid gifting points with Grind Them Down is having very resilient units and having very resilient synergy. So I've got a few examples of some synergies for you. The first one being the Warriors, and you can synergize the Canoptic Reanimator, the Ghost Arcs, the Overlords with the Resurrection Orbs, as well as the Technomancers. This is going to make that Warrior blob really difficult to shift. And the second example is having a Technomancer with 3 Canoptic Spiders and then having a large group of Canoptic Scarabs. Those spiders are going to be resurrecting Scarabs, the Technomancer can be resurrecting Spiders, and all of them are going to be providing that Technomancer with a Lookout Sir bubble. It's a real hard piece of synergy to remove from the board. So yeah, when it comes to Grind Them Down, they're not likely going to be scoring as often when you've got those type of synergies on the battlefield. And this last example I've just put in here to wind a few of you up. A few of you still believe that you can't reanimate one of the Trichominirs from the Silent King. So if you were to take Illumina Zares or a Technomancer from the Zerican Dynasty, you can be bringing back a Trichominir in your own command phase. So yeah, guys, you can still do that. It hasn't been FAQ'd. Now things that you don't really want to be gifting your opponent is units such as 5-man Flayed Ones units, or 3-biker Toonblade units, or even the Canoptic Plasmacite. That's going to count as one single unit as well. These kind of minimal units are really easy to get rid of. They're really squishy, and it's just going to be gifting your opponent Grind Them Down. Now onto No Prisoners. This one is another one that shouldn't really be a problem unless you're taking hordes of Necron warriors. Again, your opponent is not going to expect you to take 100 Necron warriors in your list. Now as soon as they do see your list and they do see loads and loads of warriors, maybe they will go for No Prisoners, but I don't think I've ever come up in a game where my opponent has taken No Prisoners against me. So I'm not going to worry too much about that one. Now onto the Warpcraft section. Ab the Witch, not a problem at all. We don't have any Psychers, don't need to worry about that one in this video. However, Warp Ritual as well as the Psychic Interrogation secondary objectives are available to your opponent if they've got Psyker models in their faction. Now I'm going to talk about both of these at the same time. They're very similar, although Warp Ritual does involve getting into the centre of the battlefield and doing a psychic action, whereas the Psychic Interrogation secondary involves being 24 inches from an enemy character and doing a psychic action. Now in order to deny Warp Ritual in the centre of the board, you just simply need to spam the centre of the board, Necron warriors, Scarabs, even the Silent King himself. If you can take charge of the centre of the battlefield, it's going to be very difficult for your opponent to be scoring Warp Ritual, especially in fact if you take the Silent King, because he's got a number of ways of actually denying powers. So he can actually deny one naturally with his ability, with the beacons, or using the Zerican stratagem, Empiric Damping for 1 command point, and you simply deny a psychic power on a 4+. Now that's my preferred method. In fact, I've done that quite often recently, because you don't need to roll more than their psychic test that they've taken, because they're likely to get all these extra plus bonuses to their psychic tests anyway, so you're not likely to beat them when you're rolling 2d6. Whereas the Empiric Damping is simply a 50-50 roll, a 4+ roll, and it is denied. Now other methods of denying powers, you've got the Tomb Sentinel, you've got the Tomb Stalker, and of course the Canoptic Spiders, all of which are able to take a Gloom Prism, which means they can deny a power as if they were a Psyker. Then the last bit of advice here, Death Marks can of course ignore the Lookout Sir, so both of those secondaries actually require a psychic character. If you've got Death Marks, of course you can just simply use your ranged weapons, ignore the Lookout Sir, and hopefully take those Psychers off the table before they actually start gaining a lot of points from those secondaries. Now we're on to the fourth one in the list, which is Battlefield Supremacy. Beginning with Behind Enemy Lines. And this one you simply need to screen your deployment zone. Now I quite like to use Canoptic Scarabs, as mentioned earlier in this video. You can screen your entire deployment zone by arcing a couple of units of Canoptic Scarabs all the way across. That's going to prevent any deep strike models coming in. Now make sure you've got just under a 9-inch gap to the edge of the sides of the battlefield, so you can have no deep strike units popping in from the sides. Then in the middle you should be filling it with your own army anyway, so I'm not too worried about the central area. But yeah, you need to be screening off from those deep strike units. Now of course there can be other units such as jet bikes, very quick units that can simply fly over our Canoptic Scarabs, but as soon as they get into our deployment zone we do need to target them. We need to get rid of them, get them off the board to prevent them from scoring in the next turn. Now alternatively, you've got the stratagem called Erethic Interception for a command point. Now I don't use this one that often if I'm honest with you. So the Death Marks or the Hexmark Destroyers have the option of shooting their ranged weapons as if it was their shooting phase. Now they can actually be using their dimensional translocation ability and not actually be on the battlefield at the stage of using the stratagem. And if that is the case, they can then be deployed within 18 inches of the enemy unit that's just come in, and of course more than 9 inches away from enemy models. and they can use their range attacks as if it was our turn. Now if it is a character model, death marks are going to be quite nice, especially with those mortal wounds. If it's a toughness 3 kind of faction that's popped in, then the Hexmark Destroyer is going to do bits, especially with that relic, the Gauntlet of the Conflagrator. It's going to be removing a lot of models, and hopefully you can be removing the entire unit before behind enemy lines is actually scored. The next one in the list is engage on all fronts. Quite similar in fact. You've just simply got to screen off areas of the board. Now you don't have to screen off the entire half of the board this time. 1/4 is probably enough, because instead of them scoring 3 victory points for having all 4 table quarters, they're only going to be scoring 2 victory points if they've got just the 3/4. So you're going to be instantly putting them down from maximizing 15 points down to 10 points just by doing that alone. But if you are able to take over a second quarter, again it could be your Canoptic Scarab swarms moving across, that's going to completely deny them scoring any points whatsoever. But I would do it 1/4 at a time, don't rush it, don't get too aggressive when trying to deny this, because as soon as you start losing models, it's going to get quite nasty. Now further to add to this, if you see one single unit in a table quarter, you should be targeting that single unit, because if you leave them untargeted, of course they're going to be assisting in scoring engage on all fronts. That will be the difference in say having 3/4 instead of 2/4, or maybe even having 4/4 instead of having 3/4. So just by removing that single unit from the quarter, you're going to at least remove 1 victory point from your opponent. Potentially you're going to be removing all 3. Now further to add to this point, if you do see one of those units alone in one of the table quarters, you need to deal with them, and you need units that can actually deal with them. I like to personally use destroyer units for this kind of mission, because once they target something, they pretty much always deliver. Whether it's your Locust Heavy Destroyers, they've never let me down, or even your Scorpet Destroyers, the amount of damage output that comes out of those guys is unreal. So just make sure you can be removing enemy units from the quarters. On to the final topic out of the secondaries, we've got Shadow Operations. Now raise the banners high. You got to bear in mind that this one only applies to infantry units. So an obvious piece of advice here is to simply remove as many infantry units as you possibly can, because as soon as all the infantry units are gone, your opponent can simply not raise any more banners whatsoever in the game. Now the second point to add to this, you need to have some sort of objective secured in your list. Now troops naturally have objectives secured, but if you've got the Nihilak Dynasty or Eternal Conquerors, you're going to now have objectives secured army-wide. So now all of a sudden you've got objectives secured on your Canoptic Scarabs, your Tomb Blades, your Canoptic Wraiths, very fast units that can simply jump onto an objective. They're not even going to be contesting the objective, they're literally just going to be stealing it. You don't even need to get into engagement range of the enemy units, you just need to get into range of the actual objectives, let your opponent come to you and waste their turn trying to fight you off. You don't need to throw away models because you've already done the job that you've kind of sent them to do anyway. Now further to add to this, again going back to that Veil of Darkness relic, this can get you onto those objectives that have got banners on them or near enough 9 inches away from enemy models, and maybe you can take a unit that can charge. Again, objective secured is quite handy here, but get your opponent's unit off that objective and that banner will be ripped down. If you don't have a Veil of Darkness relic in your list, maybe you've got some dimensional translocation units within your list such as Flayed Ones or Death Marks. Again, very similarly, they can be used in their Deep Strike ability, jumping onto some backline objectives. That's where the banners are likely going to be put up, in the enemy deployment zones. You need units to infiltrate those enemy backlines and rip those banners down. Now the last one in today's video is Retrieve Nephilim Data. This one's available to infantry units as well as biker units. Now it's very similar to what we spoke about earlier. You need to be screening off table quarters. So your deployment zone is a good place to start. Canoptic Scarab units. You need to be screening off those deep strike units from coming in, and once you know there aren't any more coming, you need to be pushing them as forward as possible. The likelihood is your opponent is going to be doing the actions for Retrieve Nephilim Data in their own deployment zone at the start of the game, and they can only do it once per turn. So the first couple of turns they're likely going to be taking their own quarters because you're not likely going to be anywhere near them to prevent them from doing so. So it will be a battle from turn 3 onwards for your opponent to try and get into your table quarters to be doing Retrieve Nephilim Data. Now if you've pushed your Canoptic Scarabs and the rest of your army out towards the no man's land of the game, they're not as likely going to be breaking through your force to be able to retrieve Nephilim Data. So guys, that's how we're going to be denying points for your opponent using secondary objectives. If you've got anything to add, put them in the comments down below, or alternatively join our Discord where we can have a talk about it. So yeah guys, on your exits don't forget to subscribe down below, like the video, and thank you all for watching. See you next time.